Donald Trump signs a proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. This during a visit by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's going home early after a rocket hit a house in Israel. Theresa May says there isn't enough support in Parliament to hold a third vote on her Brexit deal. Meanwhile, the EU has said it's now prepared to handle the UK leaving without a deal. And Xi Jinping visits Paris as France seeks Chinese investment. President Emmanuel Macron rolling out the red carpet at the Arc de Triomphe ahead of talks at the Élysée Palace. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Claire Pride. We start in Washington with Donald Trump signing a decree saying the US recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, territory that Israel seized from Syria in 1967. This change in policy came during a visit by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's cutting short his visit after a rocket hit a house 20 kilometers north of Tel Aviv, injuring 7 people. It's not yet clear who carried out the attack. Hamas denies being responsible, but the Israeli military has started striking Hamas targets. We'll have more for you on that a little bit later on. For now, though, let's go to the UK. And after hosting a cabinet meeting following a weekend of speculation about her leadership, Theresa May has made a statement about Brexit in Parliament. The Prime Minister admitted she doesn't have enough support to put her Brexit deal to another vote. She's already suffered 2 bruising defeats. Later, lawmakers are expected to back a plan to carve out parliamentary time for a series of so-called indicative votes on alternatives to May's Brexit deal. This a few days after the EU agreed to delay Brexit, which was slated for Friday.
The Council formally endorsed the legal instrument relating to the withdrawal agreement and the joint statement supplementing the political declaration. This should increase the confidence of the House that the backstop is unlikely ever to be used and would only be temporary if it is. But the Council also reiterated, once again, its long-standing position that there could be no reopening of the withdrawal agreement. So however the House decides to proceed this week, everyone should be absolutely clear that changing the withdrawal agreement is simply not an option. The default outcome continues to be to leave with no deal. But this House has previously expressed its opposition to that path and may very well do so again this week. The alternative is to pursue a different form of Brexit or a second referendum. But the bottom line remains, if the House does not approve the withdrawal agreement this week and is not prepared to countenance leaving without a deal, we will have to seek a longer extension. This would entail the UK having to hold European elections, and it would mean that we will not have been able to guarantee Brexit.
For more on this, I spoke to our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert.
Theresa May basically has walked to the cliff edge, and she's kept on walking off the cliff, hoping that perhaps she won't fall. You see a prime minister in full flail right now. Flailing what? Flailing basically to shore up what is an extremely precarious position, to say the least, because there's a contradiction here, as the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, pointed out. On the one hand, she's saying, she is acknowledging that she does not have sufficient support in this House to bring back that meaningful vote for a third time. She's already suffered 2 excoriating, bruising defeats on this vote. One of them was a historic watershed defeat, the very first vote. And last week, the Speaker of the House indicated that unless there was some fundamental change in the plan that would indicate some shift in the equation, he cited a 400 or almost 500-year-old statute, she would not have the right, that she would be barred from being able to bring back that meaningful vote. But nonetheless, they have been trying at Downing Street to find a way to drum up enough support somehow, what's eluded them twice in the past, to still try to bring it back. And what we heard today, first big thing, is she is acknowledging she doesn't have sufficient support. But here is the contradiction I was talking about, and here's where it becomes a little, more than a little, very complicated. It's the fact that we are headed on a path where she's about to, and she's all but conceded, that the government's about to effectively lose control of the Brexit process. It's about to lose control, most likely in the format of parliamentarians seizing back the initiative by approving a motion that would allow for what we keep hearing these words, indicative votes. Indicative votes would be a series of motions on alternatives to test the Parliament's will in different scenarios to try to get the Brexit process moving. Those scenarios could be anything. A lot of it's speculation right now. It could be no deal. It could be May's deal. It could be an extension. It could be canceling Brexit. It could be joining the EU, staying in the EU in a customs union, staying in a single market, staying in both, Article 50 being extended longer and longer. There are many different scenarios, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about indicative votes. But what she's saying is she is not ready to support that process. She does not. She thinks that would be reneging on basic democracy, and she doesn't think that she would be able to deliver on that decision. Anything that her government could not deliver on any decision that was made in an indicative vote. So what she's basically saying is, no, she can't bring her own deal back for a third vote, but then again, she's not ready to support any process that would call for alternatives to her plan.
That was Doug Herbert. Let's go back to our top story now, and that is Donald Trump signing a decree saying the US recognizes Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Joining me now, our correspondent in Washington, Philip Crowther. So, Philip, a big change of policy today.
Yeah, it's actually a big change in U.S. foreign policy. This is something that no country has done before the United States, the recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And add to that, of course, that it was done in the most ceremonial manner possible by this White House, with the U.S. president signing that proclamation with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right by his side. We didn't know this was going to happen today. We knew that the Prime Minister was going to be visiting. We did not know that there was going to be such a proclamation signed, and then the pen that was used for that signing handed on to the Prime Minister, with the president saying that the Prime Minister of Israel should be handing that pen on to the people of Israel. It is a huge difference that this in U.S. foreign policy for the United States to recognize the Golan Heights as the sovereign territory of Israel. Again, no other country has done this, and this, of course, comes at a particularly tense time, as you know, in Israel and in Gaza right now.
Tell us more about that then. Netanyahu cutting short his visit because of a rocket attack, and the Israeli military retaliating. Well, they're targeting Hamas, but Hamas denies responsibility.
Yes, and what Netanyahu gets here in Washington, of course, as any Israeli head of government would get, is the full U.S. support at this point. The United States policy has, and presumably will be for quite some time, that Israel has the right to defend itself. That presumably won't change. So there will be U.S. support for these military moves by Israel in Gaza right now. You're right that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will actually depart Washington pretty much directly after he meets with U.S. President Donald Trump. They're currently still here at the White House meeting. The Prime Minister Netanyahu was expected to address the AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby conference. He's not going to do that in the end. He was expected also tomorrow to have dinner with the president here. He's not going to do that. He's going to head back to Israel as quickly as possible. Of course, don't forget that in the midst of this, this is a prime minister who's running for re-election and who is getting certainly something out of this visit, which is a handshake with the U.S. president. That is something that will favor him most likely in this re-election campaign of his. So he is returning both for urgent matters in Israel, but also because he has a campaign to run right now.
And Philip, of course, I can't let you go without talking about the Mueller investigation. It found that the US president and his campaign didn't collude with Russia in an attempt to influence the 2016 election result. So a summary released yesterday. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that we've heard from the president this morning, just in the last few minutes, about the Mueller report. He was asked in the diplomatic room when that proclamation was signed next to the Prime Minister of Israel whether he thought that Robert Mueller had acted honorably. The answer from the president was yes. He did think so. This, of course, coming from a president who's been attacking the special counsel pretty much for the last 2 years, non-stop. More from the president on this, by the way, later on in the meeting in the Oval Office with Netanyahu. In that meeting, the president said that he would be for the release of the full Mueller report. Remember that all we have right now is just a 4-page letter from the Attorney General in which he makes his own conclusions and quotes some of Robert Mueller's conclusions. The whole report, we don't even know how long long it is. We don't know exactly what is in it, has not been released to the public. The president now saying that he would not mind for the whole thing to be released. That is something that Democrats are calling for right now, and Republicans certainly are not. That's a really significant addition to the conversation from the president. If he is for the release of the whole Mueller report, well, then maybe it might just be released.
All right, Philip, thank you so much for bringing us all the latest there from Washington. Now, it's day 2 of Xi Jinping's visit to France. After dining with Emmanuel Macron in the south of France on Sunday, right now China's president is here in Paris. He and Macron have laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. They're now at the Élysée Palace, and we expect them to sign a series of investment contracts. This after Italy became the first member of the group of 7 major developed economies to formally join China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. Now, on Tuesday, Macron and Xi are set to be joined in Paris by Germany's leader and the head of the European Commission. Catherine Norris-Trent is covering this story for us.
President Macron has rolled out the red carpet for the Chinese President Xi Jinping on this leg of his European tour. He's been holding talks. The two leaders have been holding talks here at the Élysée Palace. They're due shortly to give a joint declaration. A little earlier on, there was a welcoming ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe in central Paris, where the two presidents laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. They've been talking about many things on the agenda, not least commercial contracts, which they're expected to put the finishing touches to and sign this Monday. But the context of this trip is very important too, because Emmanuel Macron is essentially trying to walk a very fine line here between providing a very warm welcome, a very dignified welcome to the Chinese president. But also he's been looking at pressing a much more assertive joint European strategy towards China, urging his fellow European leaders to work together as a bloc when it comes to the world's second largest economy. He wants to see reciprocity in terms of market access to public markets, and huge amount of money to be made there. He says at the moment Chinese firms are able to invest in Europe, but not necessarily getting European firms, not necessarily getting equal treatment in China. There's also going to be more scrutiny too at a European level of Chinese investments in Europe. So it's a very ambiguous relationship. Macron and Europe still clearly want to keep doing business with China. China is the EU's biggest trading partner, but they also want to put the brakes on somewhat rampant Chinese investment and to try and control and get more scrutiny on that as well.
Catherine, what's France's stance on the Belt and Road Initiative? Didn't mean to broadcast that bit. We'll leave it there for now. Thanks for watching. I'm handing over to my colleague François Picard. He'll be with you with all the latest news at the top of the hours. Thanks for watching.